Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling a topic that you all specifically requested a deep dive into the potential for ketones and ketogenic diets in treating GLUT1 deficiency syndrome.
Yeah, it's a pretty interesting area.
So we want to find out, you know, do those things actually make a difference?
Yeah, and I think it's a pretty fascinating question because when you're talking about GLUT1 deficiency syndrome, you're talking about a condition where the brain is basically being starved of its primary fuel source, which is glucose.
Right. It's like the brain's delivery system for glucose is just totally on strike. And that happens because of problems with the SLC2A1 gene, which is responsible from making this protein called GLUT1, which is kind of like the gatekeeper of the blood-brain barrier.
Mhm.
And if the gatekeeper isn't working properly, glucose can't get through
Right.
to actually fuel the brain.
And so, as you can imagine, that leads to a whole bunch of problems. You can get a ton of neurological symptoms ranging from pretty severe epilepsy in newborns all the way to movement disorders and cognitive impairment that might not even show up until adulthood.
Wow. So it's a real spectrum of challenges. And to really unpack this further, we're going to be diving into two fairly recent studies, one in mice, and then the other one is a case study in humans. So the first study looks at how ketogenic diets and ketone supplements actually impact motor function in mice. And the second study focuses on a specific type of ketone supplement called D L-3-hydroxybutyrate. And they use that in 12 people that have GLUT1 deficiency.
Yeah.
So these studies, they both offer some pretty promising findings, but as always, it's really important to remember that this is a super new area of research. We still have so much to uncover.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's start with the basics. We know the brain needs fuel to function properly, and typically that fuel is glucose.
Right.
But what happens when the brain just can't get enough glucose? Could ketones maybe step in as a backup energy source?
That's exactly the idea. Ketones are these molecules. They're produced by the liver when your body is low on glucose. So like when you're fasting or on a ketogenic diet, which is really low in carbs and high in fat. And the key thing about ketones is that, unlike glucose, they can actually bypass that faulty gatekeeper at the blood-brain barrier.
So it's like finding a sneaky alternate route to deliver fuel. I love it.
Exactly.
Now, the mouse study, I think, was really interesting because they didn't just put the mice on a ketogenic diet. They tested a bunch of different ways to actually boost ketone levels
Yeah.
to see what would happen.
Exactly. They had some mice that were just on a standard chow diet, some on a ketogenic diet, and then others that were on standard chow, but they were given ketone supplements, either as an ester or in kind of a mineral salt form. And that allowed them to compare the effects of these different ketone boosting strategies.
I love that. I love how they mixed it up. So they were trying to see if raising the ketone levels, regardless of the method, would improve motor function in those mice. And to test that, they used the hanging wire test and the accelerating rotor rod test. Have you ever heard of that?
Yeah, for sure. The hanging wire test is all about grip strength and endurance. So you can imagine this tiny little mouse just clinging for dear life onto a wire. And then the rotor rod test measures balance and coordination as the mice try to stay on this spinning rod that just gets faster and faster.
Okay. So picture tiny mice training for the rodent Olympics. That's amazing. So what did they find? Were these ketone-boosted mice doing any better?
They were. Both the ketogenic diet and the ketone supplements led to improvements in motor function, especially during like those first few weeks of the study.
So did they all work equally well, though? Was there any difference?
Well, that's where things get a little bit more nuanced. All the interventions did increase blood ketone levels, but they did it at different rates and for different durations. The ketogenic diet, that led to a very slow and gradual increase. But the ketone salt supplement, that caused this really rapid rise in ketone levels, but the effect was much shorter.
Interesting. So it's like slow and steady versus a quick burst of energy. Did they find any other differences between the interventions?
Yeah, so they found that the ketogenic diet and the ketone salts, but not the ester, actually reduced blood glucose levels. And that makes sense.
Right.
Because both of those are basically mimicking a state of low glucose availability, which is what triggers your body to make those ketones in the first place.
Okay. Makes total sense.
Uh-huh.
But if the ketone salt provided faster improvement, why not just use that all the time?
Well, keep in mind that the improvement in the hanging wire test was temporary. So with the ketogenic diet, it kind of faded after 9 weeks. And while the ketone salt did provide a faster initial improvement, that effect was also transient.
Right. So it's like giving your brain a quick energy drink. It's going to help in the short term, but it's not going to be a sustainable solution.
Exactly.
But it is interesting to see those improvements, even if they're temporary, because it suggests that ketones might actually be a really good option for people with GLUT1 deficiency who can't handle a ketogenic diet.
Yeah, for sure. And speaking of the ketogenic diet, let's move on to that human case study out of New Zealand. You'll remember that this study focused on individuals who couldn't tolerate the ketogenic diet,
Hmm.
which can be very restrictive.
Right. It's definitely not for everyone. So what did they do instead?
So instead, they used a specific type of ketone supplement called D L-3-hydroxybutyrate. And they gave that supplement to 12 people with GLUT1 deficiency. And these individuals ranged in age from 10 to 50 years old.
Wow. That is a huge age range. And did they all have the same symptoms?
No, not at all. The participants had a whole variety of different symptom profiles, which is pretty typical for GLUT1 deficiency. Some people had seizures, others had movement disorders, and some were really struggling with cognitive issues.
Now, what happened when they started taking the DL-3-hydroxybutyrate? Did they notice any changes?
They did. There were actually some very interesting reports from the participants themselves. So a lot of them said that they felt more alert, focused, and just more able to stay on task after taking the supplement. And some even noticed improvements in their mood, anxiety levels, and fatigue.
Wow. Those are some pretty big changes.
Yeah, they are. But we always have to be really cautious with these subjective reports, right? They're incredibly valuable, but we need that objective data as well to confirm these initial impressions.
I agree. We got to get the objective data. So did they collect any objective data in this study?
They did. They gave the participants some cognitive tests to measure their working memory and processing speed, both before and after they took the DL-3-hydroxybutyrate.
Okay, so little brain workout
Sure.
before and after the ketone boost.
Exactly.
So what happened? What did they find?
So the results, they were actually quite remarkable. 9 out of the 12 participants showed statistically significant improvements in both working memory and processing speed.
Wow, that's incredible. But remind me again, what are working memory and processing speed, and why are they so important in our day-to-day lives?
So working memory is basically your brain's mental scratch pad. It allows you to hold information in your mind and then work with it. So you can think of it like remembering a phone number while you're dialing it or following a recipe step by step.
Right?
And processing speed is just how quickly your brain can actually take in information and respond to it. So like how fast you can answer a question or react to something that you see.
Right. It's how fast your brain is working.
Exactly. And both working memory and processing speed are super crucial for daily life. They affect everything from being able to follow instructions and holding conversations to making decisions.
So imagine struggling to remember what somebody just said, or feeling like your brain is constantly lagging behind. That's the kind of difficulty that this supplement seemed to alleviate for these individuals, which I think is amazing.
Yeah, it really is. But we also need to acknowledge that these are just 2 studies, and both of them have their limitations.
That's true. What are some of those limitations?
Well, both of the studies involved small sample sizes. So the mouse study had more participants, but the human case study only had those 12 people. And the human study didn't have a control group, which makes it harder to rule out any placebo effects.
Right, so we can't be 100% certain that those improvements were just from the ketone supplement. There could have been other factors involved. So what's next? Where to go from here?
So I think larger, longer-term studies are absolutely critical to confirm these findings. And they also need to answer some really important questions, like what is the ideal type, dose, and timing of these ketone supplements for different GLUT1 deficiency subtypes? Are there any long-term risks or side effects? Can you use ketone supplements alone, or should they be used in combination with other therapies?
Yeah, so many questions still to be answered. But I think it's a really exciting start. We're starting to see the potential of ketones to really improve the lives of people with GLUT1 deficiency syndrome and maybe even other neurological conditions.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, in the next part of our deep dive, we're going to explore those broader implications a little bit more, and we'll talk about what these findings might mean for you.
Okay, so we've seen some pretty promising results in both mice and humans, suggesting that ketones could be a really valuable tool in the fight against GLUT1 deficiency syndrome.
Absolutely.
But let's maybe shift gears for a moment and talk about what this all means for you.
Right. I mean, that's a really important point, isn't it? We can get so caught up in the science sometimes, but ultimately, this deep dive is all about understanding how this research might actually impact your life or the lives of people that you care about.
Right, exactly. It's got to be relevant to you. So let's say you're listening to this, and you're someone living with GLUT1 deficiency, or maybe you're caring for someone who is.
Right.
What are the big takeaways from these studies? What should you be thinking about?
Well, I think the first thing to remember is that, While these findings are encouraging, they're not a green light to just start experimenting with ketogenic diets or ketone supplements on your own, right? GLUT1 deficiency is a complex condition,
For sure.
and any kind of dietary changes or supplements should always be discussed with a healthcare professional, ideally someone who specializes in metabolic disorders.
Yeah. You definitely don't want to be like grabbing a bottle of vitamins off the shelf and just hoping for the best. You really need that expert guidance
Yeah,
to figure out what's safe and appropriate for you.
absolutely. I mean, you have to consider symptom severity, genetic subtypes, current treatments, potential drug interactions. There are so many factors that
Right.
need to be carefully considered.
Yeah, I think it's like you were saying, finding that right ketone recipe is crucial because the mouse study showed us that different types of ketone interventions had different effects.
Exactly. The type of ketone supplement, the dosage, the timing, all of that can influence how effective it is and how well it's tolerated.
Right.
It's not a one-size-fits-all approach.
Yeah, it's like personalized medicine for the brain.
Yeah.
So working with a doctor is just so important to personalize that approach and make sure that the benefits actually outweigh any potential downsides.
Yeah, I think that's key.
And speaking of downsides, are there any risks
Mm.
or side effects associated with ketone supplements?
That's a really good question. And to be honest, we don't have all the answers yet. We definitely need more long-term research to fully understand the safety profile.
Right.
But some potential side effects that have been reported include things like digestive issues, so you might experience nausea or diarrhea. There's also the possibility of electrolyte imbalances, and then in rare cases, kidney stones.
So it's not completely risk-free.
Hmm.
But again, working with a doctor can help to minimize those risks and make sure that any potential benefits are going to outweigh those potential downsides.
Exactly. It's all about that balance, right?
Yeah.
No, I think we should maybe shift gears again for a second and talk about something that I think often gets overlooked in these discussions, which is the emotional and psychological impact of actually living with a rare disease like GLUT1 deficiency.
Oh, that's so true. It's not just about managing those physical symptoms. It's about the whole person and their experience of this really challenging journey.
Exactly. It's about dealing with that constant uncertainty, the search for answers, that often frustrating process of navigating a really complex medical system. And for a lot of people, there's a real sense of isolation, like nobody really understands what they're going through.
Right? Like you feel totally alone.
Exactly.
And that's, I think, where connecting with others who really get it can be just so powerful.
I agree. Support groups, online communities, patient advocacy organizations, all of those can provide that sense of belonging, a space to share information and experiences, and a collective voice to really advocate for more research and better treatments.
It's like finding strength in those shared experiences
Yeah.
and realizing that you're not alone in this fight.
Exactly. And, to bring this back to the research that we've been discussing, I think one of the most inspiring things about these studies is that they are focusing on a rare disease like GLUT1 deficiency.
It's true.
It demonstrates a real commitment to finding solutions for these really challenging medical conditions.
Yeah. It's a beacon of hope, showing that scientific inquiry can actually make a difference, even for conditions that often get overlooked.
Absolutely. And what we learn from studying these rare diseases can often have much broader implications as well, right? It can inform our understanding of more common neurological disorders.
Yeah, so like solving a puzzle. Each piece, no matter how small, is contributing to that bigger picture.
Mm-hmm.
So where do you think this research might lead in the future? What are some of the big questions that scientists are really trying to answer right now?
Well, there are a few key areas. One is trying to figure out the optimal type and dosage of ketone supplements. Because remember, there are different forms available, and the best choice for you might really vary depending on the individual and the specific subtype of GLUT1 deficiency that they have.
Right. It goes back to that personalization. So what else are they looking at?
Another really crucial area is understanding the long-term effects of taking these ketone supplements. We know that the early studies suggest that they're generally safe, but we really need more research to look at the potential for any long-term side effects.
Yeah.
Especially in people who have other health conditions.
Right. Safety first.
Absolutely.
And I imagine researchers are also exploring whether ketone supplements could be helpful for other conditions besides just GLUT1 deficiency.
Yeah, that's a huge area of interest right now. There are a lot of people looking into the potential of ketones for things like Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, traumatic brain injury, really any condition where that brain energy metabolism might be impaired.
Wow, so that's a pretty wide range of potential applications.
It is.
It seems like the research on ketones and brain health is really just getting started.
It really is. It's a very exciting time to be following this field.
It is.
Yeah.
Now, before we wrap up part 2, I think there's one more really important aspect of rare disease research that I think we need to touch on, which is the ethical and financial challenges.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because rare diseases often receive a lot less funding and attention compared to more common conditions, even though they can have a devastating impact on individuals and families.
Right. It's a real issue of health equity.
Absolutely. And I imagine conducting clinical trials for rare diseases can also be really challenging, especially when you're trying to recruit enough participants.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
can be a huge hurdle. But thankfully, there are so many dedicated researchers, clinicians, and patient advocacy groups who are really passionate about pushing the boundaries of our knowledge and advocating for greater awareness and support for this kind of research.
Yeah. It's really inspiring to see that level of commitment and dedication.
It really is. And
Yeah.
ultimately, the knowledge that we gain from studying these rare diseases can benefit everyone, right? It often has these broader implications that inform our understanding of more common conditions as well. The human body is incredibly complex,
It is.
and every discovery that we make just brings us closer to unlocking those secrets.
It's like we're piecing together this giant puzzle, one discovery at a time. And as we kind of delve deeper into this world of ketones and their impact on the brain, I'm sure we're going to uncover even more fascinating pieces of that puzzle.
For sure.
So as we kind of wrap up this part, I
Yeah.
guess I want to leave you with this thought. Stay curious, stay informed, and stay hopeful. This journey of discovery is definitely continuing, and we're so grateful to have you along for the ride.
Absolutely.
Thanks for diving in with us.
Okay, so we've covered so much in this deep dive. From, you know, tiny mice clinging to wires to really complex workings of the human brain. And I think it's clear that ketones could be a real game changer for GLUT1 deficiency syndrome. But now, I think it's time to bring it all home. Like, what does this research actually mean for you and you? You know, I think it is inspiring to see how such a simple shift in metabolism using ketones instead of glucose for fuel can have such profound impact on the brain.
Yeah.
But you're right. We need to make this practical. You want to know how to use this information.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we've talked about the science, the potential benefits, the risks, the emotional side of living with this rare disease. But now we're ready. Like, how do we translate all this knowledge into action?
So I think the first and most important piece of advice
Mhm.
is don't go it alone. This research is really exciting, but it's not a DIY project. GLUT1 deficiency is complex.
Right.
And any decisions about, dietary changes or supplements should be made with a healthcare professional, ideally a specialist who's really familiar with metabolic disorders.
That makes sense.
Yes.
Because we've seen from these studies, there are different types of ketone supplements, different dosages, different timings. It's not as simple as just taking a pill.
Exactly. And everyone's different. What works for one person might not work for another. Plus, there could be interactions with other medications or underlying health conditions. A doctor can really help you sort through all of that.
Yeah. So it's about finding that right balance, the right ketone intervention, the right dosage, the right timing, just for you. It's like tailoring a suit.
I love that analogy.
You want it to fit perfectly.
Yeah. And that tailoring process might involve some trial and error. It might take some careful monitoring and some adjustments.
Makes sense. Now, I know we've mentioned the potential side effects, but I think it's worth emphasizing again that ketone supplements aren't completely risk-free.
Right. That's true. The early research does suggest they're generally well tolerated, but there have been some reports of digestive issues, electrolyte imbalances, and in some rare cases, kidney stones.
So it's really important to have these open and honest conversations with your doctor, right? Like talking about your goals, your concerns, anything that you're worried about.
Absolutely. It's about making informed decisions together, weighing those potential benefits against those potential risks.
Exactly. And speaking of potential benefits, I think it's important to acknowledge that the research that we've been talking about focused mainly on motor function and cognitive skills.
Mm-hmm.
But we did hear some reports from that human case study about, improvements in mood and anxiety and fatigue.
Yeah. That's where those subjective experiences are so valuable. They really highlight the broader impact this condition can have.
Yeah. It's a reminder that GLUT1 deficiency isn't just about physical symptoms. It affects your whole life, your energy levels, your emotional state,
For sure.
your ability to engage with the world around you.
And while we need more research to really understand how ketones impact these broader aspects of quality of life, it's definitely an area worth exploring further.
Oh, for sure. And I think
Yeah.
beyond just the direct effects of ketones, one of the big takeaways from this whole deep dive is the power of knowledge itself.
Right. The more you understand about GLUT1 deficiency, the emerging research on ketones, and all the potential treatment options, the better equipped you are to advocate for yourself or for a loved one.
It's about being informed and empowered, asking questions, seeking out expert opinions, pushing for the best possible care.
Exactly. And remember, you're not alone in this. There are so many dedicated researchers and clinicians, and a whole community of people who are really passionate about finding answers and improving the lives of everyone affected by this condition.
That's true. And who knows, maybe the insights gained from this research will lead to breakthroughs for other neurological conditions as well. The brain is such a complex and resilient organ, and we're just starting to really scratch the surface of what it's capable of.
Yeah, we are. And that's what makes this field so exciting. It's full of possibilities and hope for the future.
So to wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final thought. Stay curious, stay informed, and stay hopeful. The journey of discovery is still going, and we're so glad you could join us. Thanks for diving in with us.